Testing, 1, 2, 3. If you join the chat, let me know. That way I can tell you that you're watching.
Smiley faces in the chat.
Smiley faces. No, yeah, that's just the one I put in there saying that we were starting soon. Okay. Put this in, record button. It's always good to have a backup. There we go. And I'll use that again later because we're going to be talking about a couple of illustrations from things that I encountered earlier this week. It never seems to fail. Atheists find me in social media. They don't interact with me very long most of the time, though. All right. Let's pray together, and then we will get into the lecture for today after possibly talking about a review from last week a little bit. Our Father God, thank you for a beautiful day, for warmer weather, for a Lord's Day where we've been able to worship and to rest. When we come to our class time now, help us understand, help us to reflect well on how you made the world and how that you, the one true God, truly do give meaning to everything. Yeah, for the reality in which we live, help we know how we ought to live. We magnify Christ in this, become better defenders of the faith and proclaimers of the gospel. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. Hello, Brother Jeff.
Amen.
Hello, Nina.
Don't worry.
Oh, it's the whole
We're
gang.
not marking tardies just yet.
We are not marking tardies yet. I don't officially keep attendance. So.
I get a big T, huh?
Yeah. It's
Anyway.
color and sewn on your jacket.
Before we launch into this too much, well, this was working a second ago. I think I messed with it too much. Okay.
Yes, it is. I'm sweating.
That's weird. It was working like 5 seconds ago. Well, I'm going to go back here and make sure it's working again. I will receive this.
Oh, you need to set the media.
You said second.
I told you I was awake that whole time.
No, you were not. We would have to know.
Oh, don't worry. It's hard to keep a straight face, but
Next time we're going to draw the mustache.
We said we were going to put a ring.
All right, so there we go. Now it's functioning. Welcome to class. Today we shall begin to discuss what is philosophy, because I just feel the need to use a dumb British accent when I see that word for some reason.
Are we going to learn about that?
Well, a little bit. It's important. Some of the things in it are important.
You were worried last week.
Worried?
You were worried last week. I was
Now, here's the thing,
confused
though.
last
After
week.
there's some introductory things into philosophy and how that works, how we get to the problems that we get to, and the kinds of worldviews that exist out there. There's big, broad, sweeping categories of it, which should cover just about everything that you're going to encounter, be it a non-religious or religious worldview. And they all fit into one of about a half a dozen categories. Once we've done that, then we're going to launch into what I think is the most important part of the course. The way to be able to analyze and systematically destroy any unbelieving worldview. There's an acronym that goes along with that. I don't know if we'll get into the beginning of that today or not. We might. It depends on how quickly we get through some of this. But before we get started, are there any comments or questions that you wanted to bring up from the last lecture or two? What?
Oh, quit looking at me. I have no idea. I have no comment.
No comment at all? We'll see about how that goes here in a few minutes, won't we, Miss Linda? Yes, all right.
Well, at one point you were talking about the creation of the universe, right?
I believe I mentioned that, yes.
The number of years people think it is,
Mhm.
or did the Bible say it was?
Well, the main way people will get an estimate about how many years there were is by counting back the genealogical record about how many years old people were. When you go back, you get about, around somewhere about 4,000 BC or so is about the time the universe was created. If you want to allow some extra room in there, it's because of maybe some roundings of
But there are different opinions on that number, right?
Well, there are different opinions on the number. There are different opinions on a whole host of things.
Recently, I read an article about people might be referring to the creation of Adam and Eve when they say how old the earth is. There's and not how old, not the bigger number that we understood it was before. What was it, 4,000 or 6,000 BC?
So it was 6,000
I-
years ago.
Yeah,
It
I
was
read an
4,000
article about
BC.
that, so people get those two confused, I think.
Well, in the creation week, Adam and Eve would have been created on day 6, so you're not going to have a whole lot of time before that anyway.
Yeah.
But there's still a discussion with that. And that's part of the reason why I like ministries such as Answers in Genesis, the Institute for Creation Research, Jason Lyle's ministry, the Biblical Science Institute. They do a whole lot of excellent work in that area, both scientifically and exegetically. They have some very, very good people over there, and I recommend them heartily. If you haven't been to the Creation Museum or the Ark Encounter, I recommend it. Fantastic places.
You weren't there the first couple of years it was done though, right? I mean, I was there
It's been a minute since I've
7
been down
years
there.
ago, maybe?
Maybe. I think I might be pretty close to what we did. We went to the Ark Encounter a few years ago. It's been a
The Ark.
while. I've been to the Creation
I
Museum
was
I think, 3
disappointed
times.
because the first floor was nothing but empty cages.
Well, there are a bunch of those down there. I think I don't know if they've changed it a little bit since then.
now,
I
yeah.
know,
But
Yeah,
they had to change that.
yeah.
all right, the question I'm sure all of you have been longing to get to: what is philosophy? I will say this. Boo! I have a laser pointer on this. I'm not crazy. All right. Now I will say this. This will be in this particular session with the 2 subjects that I mentioned up there. The what is philosophy, the types of worldviews. This will be some of the most difficult material that we're going to cover. Partly because it's unfamiliar to many, and some of the terminology can be a little challenging. But I'm happy to pause at any time, address questions. And Kip has expertise in this particular section, a good bit beyond what I know. He's been teaching things like this for some time, and we'll take as long as we need to in it, no problem at all. But it is important, so why take the time to go through a discussion about philosophy? I think that's a fair question. A lot of people seem to be raising that question. I think it's important, and many others have thought so as well, because we want to have a cursory background into philosophy itself, not just to get some information about how people have sought to work through various intellectual and behavioral issues over the years, but we're also going to dispel some common objections against philosophy in general, which we're all too quick to dismiss it as silly or unimportant. Believe it or not, dismissing philosophy as silly or unimportant is a kind of philosophy, and it doesn't really work very well. So, into it we go. Stick with me here in this. Shortly afterwards, like I mentioned, we're going to get into the details of how to bring down any and all unbelieving worldviews. And that's not an overstatement. Any and all unbelieving worldviews will collapse before the might of the one true God in examination according to who he is and what he's revealed in Scripture. We talked about the myth of neutrality, that everyone has an underlying philosophy. But let's talk about a particular guy here. Let's consider a guy by the name of Joe. Because your average Joe seems to be a good way to introduce him. Joe. What about Joe do we need to talk about? Well, Joe has a particular set of beliefs. First of all, he believes, like so many of the secularists in this day and age do, that homosexuality is perfectly fine. It's just the way people are. Some people are attracted to people of the same sex. Some people are attracted to people of the opposite sex. That's just the way they are. That's what Joe believes. We shouldn't be having a fight over it. Don't try to disagree with me, is how he presents his case. So, this particular person, our friend Joe here, may not profess to believe in God, but either way, he just accepts his belief that homosexuality is just fine as a fact. They can't help it, he says. They're just acting on their nature, so we shouldn't try to hold them accountable. Now, on the other side of things, you might say, Joe is also an avid supporter of Ukraine and cannot believe that Russia would go to war with them. He refers to Putin as an evil madman. And he believes that the United States Special Forces, maybe the Navy SEALs, should arrange a mission to assassinate him and put a stop to this conflict. All right. Now, the next question. Does our friend Joe have a philosophical worldview?
Of course he does.
Yes, he does. Of course he does. Better question. Is he consistent? No, he's not. Joe is not consistent in his worldview. So a key component of Joe's worldview here is that he believes that people are biologically preset to have desires of a certain kind, right? It's not just a view of human nature. It is a profound view of human nature. He believes that people are biologically preset to think and act in certain ways, and he reveals this because he believes that homosexuality is just fine. It's part of how they're just wired biologically. But there's a bit of a problem. He has a political philosophy too. His political philosophy is that, well, with regard to foreign dictators, and if we decide that we don't like them as a nation, we can just go out and blow the brains out of them if we feel like it. Now, how do his political philosophy and his biological philosophy compare? Are they consistent? Not in the least. Because think about it this way, if the homosexual can't help but act in accord with his nature as Joe has described it, then Putin wouldn't be able to do anything except what was in accord with his nature. Maybe Vladimir Putin is just a megalomaniac who feels like conquering people. Maybe that's just how he's wired. Maybe we should just encourage him and what makes him happy. After all, that's what Joe says we should do with the sodomite. Why is it right to punish one person for his innate behavior and not the other? See the question? Now, important point to understand. Everyone is a philosopher, much like everyone is a theologian. As I've said before, I have several times in the course so far, it is not whether you will or will not do philosophy or theology, but rather how well you will do philosophy or theology. Welcome, George. It is inescapable. It is inescapable. You cannot decide whether or not to do philosophy. You are doing it. The only question is if we're going to do it well. The distinction between the average Joe, as we just described him, and the PhD in philosophy is just a matter of degree. No pun intended. Well, maybe. PhD. Always intend your puns, mortals. Yes. But the point is they're all doing philosophy. You can take the most backwoods redneck neighbor you know, and you will find that at some point he has wondered what is real and what is not, how he should live his life, things like that. It can be something extremely simple, such as the existence of the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus. Do they exist? Of course they don't exist. But that's a metaphysical question. It's a question about reality, and then therefore it's a philosophical question. The conclusion made, of course, is that Santa Claus is not real, but mom and dad are real, where your presents are coming from, most of them anyway. They're the ones giving them to you. So, well, anyway, I'm sorry if I'm the one to break it to you. Santa Claus isn't real. Your parents have been doing this the entire time. But if you jump into the middle of a discussion, I'll tell you what. You jump into the middle of a discussion with philosophers without knowing how they got to where they are and why, yes, philosophy probably looks pretty silly. I would think so too. This is where jokes come from about armchair intellectuals who like to sit around in the rooms and sip on whatever they're sipping on and say, why is there air? I mean, seriously now, why waste time like that? That's what people will tend to say. People mockingly joke about the amazing insight, sarcastic, the amazing insight it took for some philosopher to discover the law of identity, like A equals A. Good on you there. A dog is a dog. That took some real brain power, didn't it? Didn't it?
It was Aristotle.
No, forget that. That's Aristotle. No. But seriously, though, the reason why people joke about this and get everyone to laugh along is for the most part, we do not know where philosophical problems come from. And we also fail to appreciate the biblical categories that give rise to them. Here's an exercise in it. Everyone is naturally curious. We just are. If a baby never reached out for a toy in his crib, then we would conclude that even at an age of just a few months old, there's something wrong with him. 10 months, he's never reaching out for his toys. He doesn't want to play with the mobile. He just kind of lies there like, wrong? Yeah, probably. See, curiosity is built into us. It's part of what drives us in the dominion mandate. It's what drives it. Children, even at their infant level, seek to organize the world in their own way. Maybe they'll take one toy and put it over here. Maybe they'll put a different toy in another spot in some semblance of order that may only make sense to the mind of a 1-year-old, but they are ordering it. It doesn't mean that their thinking is very organized, of course, but eventually children grow up. They learn to sit through a class, read a book for half an hour, take time needed to cook a meal, and those kinds of things. In the process of growing up and learning, we reduce the world to generalizations, how things generally work. One of the first things that we learned, and we heard people talk to us about this a lot when our children were very young, In infants, we often speak of learning the permanence of objects. When you have somebody hold up the blanket and you drop it and disappear and you step out of the way and the kid's like, what happened? What's going on? Well, they don't realize that they're still supposed to be there until eventually they do. And then they realize how the world works in that way. They recognize the face behind the towel. The game of peekaboo. It's a wonderful thing. I do recommend. Well, to a point. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about taking experience and reducing it to law-like generalizations. Law-like generalizations. The next big subject we'll discuss. Now, this is not just about what we learned in our younger years, such as how colors go together. If you take blue and paint, we'll say paint because light's different. If you take blue and yellow and you mix them together, what are you going to get? Green. We all know this. We learned this. It's how the world works. And if you take blue paint and yellow paint, mix them together, you will always get green. We learn how to play sports by the rules and score goals and achieve victory, those kinds of things, other such things. The entire education process, however we go about it, is a process of reducing the world to law-like generalizations. This is how stuff works, and it's always going to work like this. I did this not too long ago when learning to desolder and resolder an HDMI port onto a printed circuit board. Those are really small pins. And I'm not quite as sturdy as I used to be. But in any case, you figure out what works and why. You heat a certain temperature. You apply pressure in a certain way. You use a certain amount of solder, whatever it is. And then once you grasp that and it starts working, then you can get faster at it. It'll continue because you know how it's going to work. You apply your knowledge and get better at what it is. 2 hours, I think, the first time I did one the other day in 40 minutes. Because things keep working the way they keep working in this world that God has made. So in this, we have moved beyond childlike curiosity, and we've moved into more disciplined thinking. When we understand law-like generalizations, we discover that's how things work. We apply that knowledge, and we continue improving and being able to take dominion over our environment. So, law-like generalizations. We can call those universals. Maybe that's a good word for it. But we also start to think about something else as we grow up. We start to think about human behavior and the relative nature of human behavior. Two different categories here. Law-like generalizations, relative nature of human behavior. Even when we're young, we do this. We identify people with whom we interact as being of a certain kind of temperament. You learn who the bullies are. And you learn what kind of people bullies like to pick on. You also discover as you go through school, some students prefer biology. Some students prefer mathematics. Some students prefer music. Some students prefer none of those. Are there at least students then? Well, maybe not. But you learn that people are not made happy by the same things. I like this kind of movie and not that one. Someone might like chocolate ice cream. Someone might like strawberry ice cream. Someone might not like ice cream, and I don't understand those people. But the conclusion is then, by many, because of all these differences in people, their behaviors, their tastes, their preferences, that everything is relative because people are so very different. So we also learn, kind of related to the first one, though somewhat to the second, that things work together in a causal relationship. We have something that causes an effect, and if we do this certain thing, we expect the same kind of result. Which should be, there we go. Sciences, like physics, chemistry. The game of pool or billiards works this way. We do not wonder that if tomorrow, if we have a cue ball in the same place and have the balls, let's say at the corner pocket the same distance, that if we strike the ball in the same way, that something is going to act differently. If it's the same table and the same ball and the same force, we would expect the same result. It's going to happen. We learn such things in simple interactions in our homes. Well, we wouldn't necessarily call it causal relationships, I guess. I used this as an illustration before. If you touch the hot pan that just came out of the oven, it will hurt you and burn you. It will not feel good. And you know the same thing would happen tomorrow if you were to touch the same pan in a similar way, which is why you don't do that. The world operates in a consistent fashion because of the principle of causality that God has woven into it. So as we grow up, we realize a couple of generalizations about the world. First, the world operates in a causal fashion, a causal law-like fashion. Second, we notice that everyone is different and things are relative. So the question then must come. How do we bring these things together? How is it that we have a world that expresses both law-like order and causal relationships, and also a kind of relativism with everyone being different? once you start asking that question, you started doing philosophy. And it's a whole lot better way to get into the discussion than ask, why is there air, isn't it? What I've described to you, by the way, is one version of a big ancient problem in philosophy called the one and the many. How is it that we have both of these things in this world? How do they come together? Where did it all come from? By the way, how do you answer the problem of the one and the many? There's only one way to answer it consistently and ultimately. And it's Christian theism. Because we have one God. And yet we have three persons. And yet they're together. And there's no contradiction. And he created a world that reflects that very thing. Problem solved. I mean, really, that's it. You can talk more about it, but that's how you account for it. No one else can. Go figure. But that problem of the one and the many. So, you might wonder. Maybe you do. I hope you do. But why do you care? It's like, that's great, Dave. It's wonderful. But why should I care about bringing these things together? What is the big deal about it anyway? Okay.
We all do that every day. We all make generalizations every day.
We do.
And whenever we learn something new, we fit it into a category in our brain that relates to other things. And so we categorize those things. Categories is this process of the one and the many, this generalizations, whenever we categorize something.
One of the many also way of describing that universals, I used that word earlier, universals and particulars.
Yeah.
Universal principles, particular examples, according to said principles. And we'll talk about Plato and how you work with that at some point too as we review him. But why should we care about it? Like Kip said, we do this all the time, we do it every day, but we can get into some really serious, very unpleasant examples in a hurry. Here's a reason. Sorry, Linda.
Oh, well.
Well, how'd you classify that?
We love you, Linda, we do. In any case, joking aside, here's why it matters.
Candlestick.
When something like this happens, all of a sudden, why do I care about bringing these things together tends to go out the window, because something is going to come to your mind should such a terrible thing happen. You're going to want something done about it. Maybe you want revenge. Probably. Maybe you want justice. Maybe you're thinking about both. Now, here's a problem. If you're thinking about a world that is just causal and law-like, where that reigns supreme, say without exception, then it would make absolutely no sense at all to seek justice, whatever justice is, for the person who killed my mother any more than it would make sense to seek revenge against a tree when an acorn falls on your head. It's just how the world works. It's how gravity works. Revenge wouldn't make sense. It's just how human nature works. You can't help what he did, so there's no point in doing anything about it. It's all just law-like causal relationships. There are people that reach that conclusion.
Well, and they have to reach that conclusion if they're an atheist, if they don't believe in God. We see nothing in the natural world that is not causal and law-like in the natural world. So I have a great illustration if you got a minute.
I got it. Okay. I'll sit on this stool here. Listen.
So when one of the cool things about homeschooling is that you get to do chemistry at home. And so my son and I were doing a chemistry experiment, and this is much better on the board.
The professor has come to the front of the class.
There he is. We take a bit of hydrochloric acid, and we put it in a test tube, right? And then what we do is we take a balloon and put some magnesium tape in the balloon. And we take the magnesium, the balloon, put it on the test tube, and we lift it up, and the magnesium tape falls down into the hydrochloric acid, and a chemical reaction takes place. So can you tell by looking at this what the chemical reaction would be, what the resulting compound would be?
Well, you get NGCl and you get hydrogen gas,
There you go. Yeah, magnesium chloride.
which is salt, which is what you use to thaw mount the ice in your driveway sometimes.
Exactly, and hydrogen gas, right? So, anybody know anything about hydrogen gas?
What happens if you light it on fire?
So what happens is that the hydrogen gas fills the balloon, right? So you've got a balloon full of hydrogen gas. What does a 12-year-old boy and his dad do with a balloon full of hydrogen gas?
50-year-old man do? What is he going to do?
Well, we decided to take it out in the garage and expose it to an open flame. And so you get this wonderful fireball.
Oh, it's
Whoosh.
Ooh.
Big yellow fireball. So what are you doing? What's the chemical reaction when you're burning hydrogen? You have hydrogen plus, anyway, the chemical reaction. Yeah, oxygen. What is that for?
Water.
H2O.
Mhm.
Right?
That's called complete combustion.
Yeah. So there's our chemical reaction on the board there. Sorry.
And it operates in a law-like fashion.
Right. Well, yeah, and you know,
How many times will that happen if you do that experiment? Do it consistently.
we
Every
tried
time.
it 12 times. So,
Well,
so,
you just wanted to blow stuff
I was gonna say, yeah.
we did it 12 times, and every time it did the exact same thing. You know, chemical reaction, big balloon fireball, and giggles from the 12-year-old boy. So
Yes.
that was we did that about because we only had 12 balloons, right? So
So that's why they stopped.
we
Ran out of
stopped.
balloons.
But the funny thing is it happened exactly the same every single time. Because why? Well, because the hydrochloric acid did not have a choice about whether or not to combine with the magnesium.
It's just how the world works.
And the magnesium and the hydrogen gas did not have a choice once it was exposed and oxidated. It did not have a choice but to combine with the oxygen and then become water and release energy and become water. There's no choice in the matter. It always happened like that. Matter, time, space, and energy, they work together like that. They cannot help but do that. So what is your brain made of?
Oatmeal.
Matter, time, space, and energy. Your brain can't possibly help but react in the way that it chemically has to, necessarily has to. So our human choice is free.
That's the question that comes up. If everything,
Is
if
it
this
matter?
is all you have,
Then you can't choose to do otherwise. So the guy that killed your mother couldn't have chosen to do otherwise. Why would you blame him?
that's the argument. If all you have is causal law-like relationships, now I'm not saying that's all you have, but that's an argument. What he said put forward, the so-called atheist is going to be presenting that sometimes.
Well, and
They won't be
atheists-
consistent as they do it, but
do you understand what I'm getting at there? The natural world, the interchanges in the natural world are necessary. They have to happen. They cannot do otherwise. And if all that man is made of, whoever murdered your mother is made of, is matter, time, space, and energy, then he can't escape that causation either. And his decisions are forced, and there's no freedom.
please
And-
notice he keeps using the word if.
Yes, well, this is where I force the atheist to be consistent with his worldview. So what we're saying is that there's no moral fault in that person. He couldn't have done otherwise. He had to kill your mother. He didn't have a choice in the matter. Is that the world we live in?
Like, it certainly isn't the one we want to live in, right? Of course it's not. But there's another side to this coin, too. How about this one? Let's go with relative situations, shall we? Again, someone has murdered your mother. So if that's the case, if the world is just relative, why would I even want to wait for the state to convict the guy?
Right.
Why don't I just take matters into my own hands? I'm going to kill the murderer myself. Not only that, but because I'm so angry, I'm going to kill his entire family and burn his house down over the top of him.
Avenger of blood.
Now, here's the next question. And as Christians, I think we should be able to answer this one. Neither of those responses would be a righteous response.
No.
No, neither of them. But you see, important decisions are made on the basis of how you generalize about the nature of reality, how you know what you know and how you should live your life and why all of it happens. This is why it's important to bring these things together, because if you go with just one or the other, you get disaster. This is very important. So, when we ask the question of whether or not we ought to execute convicted murderers and how to do so, which is a big discussion in Indiana right now, I might add, there's actually a bill that some leftists put forward in the legislature to get rid of capital punishment altogether. So people are going to defend their view on whether or not you should execute murderers on the basis of their philosophical assumptions. So doing philosophy makes a bit more sense this way, yes? When you start at the bottom with curiosity, you make observations. You notice causality and relativism. You make generalizations.
You arrive at a particular problem. That's a problem. Philosophy is necessary in order to hold it all together and make a decision about how to act, think, or speak. And how we respond to anything will be on the basis of what we believe about what is real, how we know what we know, and how we ought to live our lives. I think philosophy
Can you
makes it.
explain the word relative in that sense?
Relative is kind of the idea that anything goes. Relativism.
Whatever feels good to you, do it.
And where there isn't a governing law-like or causal principle over that to determine how you're going to act or think. Rather just whatever. Because after all, people are different. I like strawberry ice cream, he likes chocolate ice cream. They're different, but we're both people. What makes the difference? No, things must be relative. But
In other words, it's the idea that everybody has their own opinion, and everybody's opinion is equally valid.
or say it in the common vernacular today, how people, you have your truth, I have my truth.
Right.
Which is stupid, by the way. All that is to say, you believe one thing, I believe another. That's really all that means. But that's how it gets conveyed. This is true for me, that's true for you, because everything's relative and nothing can really be known, so that's how we're going to go about things. That's how we'll make ethical decisions.
At first I thought you said go with your relative.
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah.
We're not talking about
Because of
aunts and
the murder.
uncles and, well, we're talking about mothers, I guess, so, sorry, Linda.
So what we hear now is everybody has their own truth, and that's what
Yeah.
That's the
what
claim.
you're saying.
And that's the relativism aspect of it.
Right.
That falls apart in a hurry. We're going to show how that happens
Oh my
here really
goodness.
shortly. Because no one, people can claim a lot of things what they want. They're going to claim both of these things, by the way, that everything is universal in the law, like, or they're going to claim that everything is relative. And all you got to do is push on it for more than about 60 seconds, and it falls apart because they can't live that way. They might claim it, but they don't do it because it's impossible. Because it's not the world. Those things separated from each other without the Word of God and God Himself backing it is not how this world works. Which is why the Christian is the only one who has an answer to these things that's even consistent. Everything else falls apart. And we'll talk about the subjective and skeptical nature of all these things here this evening as well. So, let's see. What happens, though? What's the alternative to doing philosophy and understanding these things and bringing them together? What is the alternative? If you try putting away your philosophy, try putting away your worldview when it comes to seeking justice for murder or how you should spend your money, what happens if you try to reconcile causality and relativistic differences? Well, can you? On this, an example, Samuel Clemens. Let's say that there's a guy standing in the corner, his name is Samuel Clemens. Let's also say that Samuel Clemens is the same man as Mark Twain. Now, does it follow from those two things that I can conclude that I know that the man standing in the corner is Mark Twain? Both of those things might be true, but it doesn't mean that I know that it's true. So maybe I know that it's Samuel Clemens, and it may be true that he's Mark Twain, but it doesn't mean that I know of the reason for it, that it's true. And this particular law of philosophy and logic is called the indiscernibility of identicals in intentional contexts. You're like, what? That's okay, you can say what. Now, if I started with that on the board earlier, before I got into anything else that I'd said, you just think, well, why did I come to class tonight? Right? But that's not where we start. We get there eventually when we talk about higher order reasoning, but we need to think through things and order our generalizations about things first. Baby steps. We can go back to the guy who says that homosexuals can do what they want, but Putin needs to be shot. He has not done his philosophy well, and he has not brought these things together that we're talking about. He has failed to be systematic in how he views the world and human nature. However, even though he does it poorly, he does not cease to do philosophy. We do it too, either well or poorly, even if we never take a philosophy class. But well, here's a surprise. Apologetics is a very specific field of Christian philosophy in many ways, so you're kind of taking one at least to some degree. Now, what is it then to do philosophy properly? How do we do it right? How do we do it in a well-ordered and God-honoring manner? Well, first, there's a critical task the philosopher goes through. He needs to cross-examine people's opinions. The philosopher cross-examines people's opinions. This, of course, is what makes philosophers so very popular and well-liked in the world. What happened to Socrates again? He was executed because he kept asking questions like this. It also makes it no fun to watch movies with your family when you think this way. Remember I talked about that last week?
It's fun for me.
It's fun for me too, but Dad,
Yeah.
I keep telling you.
Who cares?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But what I mentioned mentioned last week is certainly true. We need to be self-conscious about our presuppositions and those of the people in the media that we consume. We cannot afford not to be. But Socrates, like we said, Socrates got executed because he asked questions that people got sick of. He challenged people who thought they knew what justice or beauty was, or what anything was, really. And in the course of asking them questions, he demonstrated that they had not systematized their thinking, and he tied them up in intellectual pretzel shapes. And they killed him for it. But this is a necessary task. We must cross-examine people's opinions. Why do you think that? Why did you say that? Why do you believe that? How did you come to that conclusion?
Because we have our own.
Well, we do have our own. We have our own faith position we're coming from. But those are questions that we need to be asking. And we need to do it from the Christian position that we talked about, again, last week. It's difficult to do so. People aren't going to like it. Tough. It's necessary. If it's necessary, whether it's hard or not is irrelevant.
It forces them to face the absurdity of their own position.
It does.
Yeah.
People don't like it when they find out what they've been thinking is absurd.
Yeah, God has planted this. He has given us an intellect, and they're made in the image of God, and God has given them that, and that intellect seeks consistency, even if they don't like show it. It seeks consistency, and when you just ask the right questions, people get like,
And it's uncomfortable.
and it's like, you're recognizing the problem.
Yes,
You
good,
know,
good.
That's all.
Excellent, or something like that, right? Yes, important. So, yes, old cartoons. Let's see here. There we go. There we are. There it is. So the first critical analytical task of philosophy seeks reliable presuppositions for all of our thinking. That's important. We seek reliable presuppositions for all of our thinking. Because we need to be able to have reasonable conclusions about the stuff that we're thinking about. So, think of it as the foundation of a building. We're looking for foundations, reliable foundations, in three separate categories to have reliable presuppositions in all of our thinking. Three categories. What are those categories? Well, I've said them multiple times. The first category is we want to establish foundations for metaphysics. Metaphysics is what is real. What is real? Not imaginary things, not fairy tales, unicorns, whatever. We want to know what's real. So, are angels real? They are, yes. But that's a metaphysical question. Because it's asking about the reality of something. You ever heard this one? How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? And you're like, why do people ask questions like this? It seems silly, doesn't it? Until you realize the thought process behind it. Because the issue about this is the issue of individuation. What makes one member of a class different from another member of a class? How does one individual be distinct from another individual and they're both the same thing? Everyone in this room is human, but what makes us different from one another? There are several things, but what individuates one thing from another? One way to do this is to distinguish by characteristics. The obvious male and female, of course. But people have different eye color, hairstyle, skin tone, other such things. Now, another way to distinguish is to say there is different matter in me than there is in you, which is true. Now, if you were to take a cookie cutter and a batch of dough and impress that cookie cutter on the batch of dough sitting on your wax paper or wherever you're putting it, the dough in one of them would necessarily be different from the dough in another one. It wouldn't even be the exact same shape, even with the same cookie cutter. There will be similarities. You have your duck cookie cutter and you're making duck cookies. That's great. You see that. But the dough is not going to be exactly the same, especially if you didn't stir in all your sugar properly. Always stir your sugar properly. Now, angels. If angels are distinguished by immaterial matter such as characteristics, but not by the matter in them, then how many can fit on the head of a pin? An infinite number of them, because they don't take up space. On the other hand, if they do have matter, then you'd have a hard time fitting one. Metaphysical questions. What makes them distinct? Are they real or not? Metaphysical questions. Is there life after death? Are angels real? Do unicorns exist? Those kinds of things. So that's the first one. Metaphysics. What is real? The next one. Epistemology. That is, how we know what we know. Epistemology. How do we know what we know? We seem to be picking on mothers a lot this evening. Oh well, this is how it works. How do you know that your mother loved you? Linda, you were so fun to have. It was so great.
Didn't say a word, did I?
You didn't have to. How do you know your mother loved you? That's actually a pretty good question. For multiple reasons, let's go into them. You might have a list of things she's done for you throughout your life. She's cared for you in various ways. She's given gifts to you. She's done all sorts of things for you. It's a host of things. You can make quite the list. But then you need to ask this question. How do you know she did those things for you? How do you know?
It was Santa Claus.
That's right. That's a metaphysical question, though. Santa Claus, does he exist? Anyway, so well, how do I know she did this? Well, I remember that she did these things for me. I remember that she cooked breakfast for me this morning. I remember that she might have sent a card for me on my birthday, whatever, sure. Okay, you remember that she did these things for you, right? Therefore, you remember that she loves you, okay? Now, here's the fun one. How do you know that your memories are reliable?
How do you know?
How do you know that your memory? That was a great time to ask. How do you know that your memory is reliable?
She knows it's not.
I know it's not. How do you know it's not?
But yeah, she remembers that you said that a moment ago, right? So I remember that I know that my mother loves me because I remember that she did those things for me. But how do I know that my memory is reliable? Well, how do you know the memory is reliable? Because you can think of it this way, right? Well, I know that my memory is reliable because the last time I tested it, it was reliable. In other words, you remember that the last time you tested it, it was reliable. But we're asking about the reliability of your memory. How do you know you're not remembering that incorrectly? See, that is something called begging the question. And that is such an important logical fallacy. We're going to talk more in depth about it later. And it really destroys a lot of really dumb worldviews and thinking. But the idea here is if you use your memory to support your memory in an argument, you have created a loop of justification that you cannot escape, and it becomes irrational. Fallacious appeal to authority is another one. Yes. Now that I've messed with your head a little bit, maybe you're not going to sleep well tonight because maybe your mother's don't love you.
Your baby.
Not anymore.
Oh, I love this guy. Yes.
I know my mom loves
No, that's right. He does, and he's right.
because I'm so lovable.
But Kip will be able to justify why his memories are reliable too.
Well,
Well, all of us will
how
shortly.
we know what we know?
That's it. That's the question. That's epistemology. That's so
I
important.
just figured you loved me because I'm so lovable. That's why.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, I think there might be a fallacy or two involved in that one. But anyway, we talked about this one this morning because we're getting into the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5. Ethics. Philosophy is concerned with establishing foundations for ethics. Maybe more broadly, axiology, as Kip would talk about in his classes, but we're going to stick with ethics specifically because it serves our purposes very well. What is ethics? Ethics is how we ought to live our lives. Right and wrong. Good and evil. Moral or immoral. Ethics. How ought we live? Again, we can think about Joe, who thinks sodomites can't help themselves, but Putin can. Why, Joe? Just why? But how he lives his life and how he thinks about moral issues is in play here. His presuppositions about human conduct are in question. Asking questions about these three things is the first task of philosophy: critical analysis. And on the basis of these presuppositions, you can go into the different realms of life or fields of study to show their reliance on them in order to proceed with any meaningful examination in those fields. For example, you might think about history. What we've learned about history, ancient history, U.S. history, whatever. The historian has a job to do, but he's also a philosopher in that he has a foundation in epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. He just applies it to history. How do we know what we can know about history? What was real? What actually took place? Did people act rightly or wrongly when this war started? Those kinds of questions come up. The biologist is trying to arrive at law-like generalizations about living things, but his generalizations rest on his philosophy. How do I know that this particular life form is doing these kinds of things? Is it right or wrong for people to act this way? Is it right or wrong to pursue research in a certain way? Medical ethics is important, and medicine is a subset of biology and chemistry. We can talk about astronomy, or literature, or music, or even grocery shopping. Honestly, the subject doesn't matter. Whatever you think about these things, and whatever you do in those fields rests on philosophical presuppositions, and yes, even your grocery shopping at Kroger last night. Actually, I went to Kroger Friday night. Anyway, So let's think of all this though in terms of shopping, because I like food. Let's go grocery shopping. Bacon was on sale at Kroger's, so I bought some. What you believe about all those things determines how you will shop. It also determines if you're gonna shoplift. Or consider, say, a Hindu in his worldview. Would a good Hindu go grocery shopping? You think, yes, yeah, but see, what do Hindus say about the nature of reality? We're going to unpack this more in detail later, but for now, I think this serves as an amusing illustration. Hindus believe that everything in the material world is maya, or illusion. So if that's the case, there's no distinction, because it's all illusion, so the difference between the 9 and 12 is also an illusion. So if you were a Hindu and were to go shopping, how would you know the difference between a dozen eggs or 9 eggs? Furthermore, why pay for anything? Money's an illusion. Why pay for it? So you don't pay for it. The shopkeeper follows you out to your car with a cart full of groceries. And, well, the Hindu says, what groceries? You took these without paying for them. What groceries? Hey, who are you? You're an illusion. It doesn't work. Hinduism falls apart really quickly. But this is all related to the first task of philosophy. We ask critical questions. And we analyze someone's metaphysic, what his view of reality, his epistemology, his view of how he knows what he knows, and his ethic, how he ought to live his life. So, that's the first task. The second task is to hold all this stuff together. You have to put something around everything you've learned. You got to bind it together. You got to put a roof on top of it. You cannot just learn about various elements of knowledge or reality. You need something that binds everything you've understood into a unified worldview. It has to come together. We ask questions such as, what is man? Is he just an animal? A lot of people are going to tell you that. Is he capable of something like love or hate or reasoning? Not just an animal anymore, is he? Does he murder and steal? Is he something close to God? What is the meaning of life? And in light of all of that, how then should we live? People make fun of that question. What is the meaning of life? But everybody asks it. Who hasn't wondered, what am I here for? At least at some point in your life. If life is just a continuous loop of growing up and getting married and having children who will grow up and get married and have children who will grow up and get... Is this all that life is about? People tend to get really philosophical when friends or family members die. Don't they? Should they do? Some will lament it so very much that they will express a desire to have died instead so as not to have to go through the pain. By the way, that leads to another question. Probably not the best one to ask if your friend is crying his or her eyes out because a close friend just died. But why is it that we have funerals and memorial services for people, but not for cockroaches, which we will happily kill with a can of raid without a second thought? If we're all just the same stuff, stardust, random blobs of tissue, ugly bags of mostly water, as I think science fiction put it at one point. Yes, like Star Trek, yes. But if that's all we are, then what does it matter? What's the difference? Why one and not the other? How do I relate what I learned in physical science or political science to what I know about literature? To how I respond to a starlit night's beauty on the middle of nowhere, to how I discipline my children, and on and on. And yes, it all does relate, necessarily. Philosophers don't do a whole lot of detailed work in the various disciplines I've mentioned, but they do help lay a foundation and help you hold it all together when all is said and done. And when you tie it all together, you get what you call a worldview. What is a good working definition of a worldview? I've used that word a lot already. Now we're going to get a good definition of it. This is a good working definition of a worldview. If you're writing things down, this might do it. I'll take the time as necessary if you want to. Or maybe hit repeater on this particular section of the video or something later on. But a worldview is a network of presuppositions, not tested by natural science, in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. A worldview is a network of presuppositions not tested by natural science, in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. All. That's important. That is one of the most important definitions we're going to encounter in our entire class. Let's break it down a little bit. Absolutely. A worldview is a network of presuppositions. It's not just one, it's a whole bunch of them. It's every single one that you have and how it's working together. The most basic connections we have about the nature of reality, how we know what we know, and how we live our lives. This is what makes up our worldview. Also note, part of the definition of a worldview is that it is not tested by natural science. That's because we view the entire scientific endeavor through the lens of our worldview. It's been said and rightly said by men like Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis during his debate with Bill Nye years ago, that atheists and Christians have the exact same evidence with regard to astronomy, geology, paleontology, chemistry, physics, etc. Same evidence. However, atheists and Christians reach entirely different conclusions about these things because of opposing worldviews, the lens through which they're looking at all the evidence. Your network of presuppositions gives you the nature of science, the methods you use in science, as well as the conclusions you draw from the scientific process. Your worldview tells you how to tie together and make sense of beauty, science, logic, human dignity, justice, and the meaning of life in general. So you must understand this definition of worldview. It's very, very important. Network of presuppositions not tested by natural science, in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. Something else to understand about worldviews. They're package deals. Worldviews are package deals. That is, you don't get to make substitutions. Sorry, you order combo number 3, they're not going to let you swap one item out for another one. A worldview is a worldview. People do not get to borrow from incompatible worldviews to their core principles and put them together into some sort of philosophical word salad. It doesn't work that way. Worldviews have necessary interrelationships between the various beliefs in them. You will not find someone who's an empiricist, that is, they believe that the only things that you can know are based on observation, who has Plato's view of reality. Plato believing that there's a separate unseen realm of forms or ideas, which someone who only believes in the physical world will reject, because if everything is physical, there's no such world. Ideas versus particulars is the distinction Plato makes, which we'll talk about later, but illustrate. If we were to see 3 ducks on a pond, let's do Disney and call them Huey, Dewey, and Louie. There's an idea of duckness, you might say, that we know, which causes us to recognize them as particular ducks. We didn't think one was a hippopotamus, one was a giraffe, and one was a grizzly bear. We thought they were all ducks. So where is the idea of duckness? The idea of duckness is not on the pond. The ducks are on the pond, the individual ducks. But it's not in your head either, really, because if the idea were in your head, when you die, it dies with you. Plato said there's a realm which contains these things. We talked about it a little bit in church history class, but anyway, more on that later. So if you have that view that there's a realm of ideas, the universal, and then the particulars, the ducks, you're not going to be an empiricist, because ultimate reality is outside of time and space, and something that is in time and space can't be the way you know about it. So you cannot just weave together contrary ideas. Ideas must comport with one another in a worldview. They must comport to one another. They must get along. Because worldviews are foundational to our defense of the faith, and worldviews are package deals, we must understand that we've made a commitment for all of life in our worldview. All of life. Because everything you think and do is tied to your Christian commitment. Everything. Also, any attack against any point of your Christian faith implicitly challenges everything about it, and vice versa. That is, any attack against the unbeliever's worldview also does the same thing. So you attack one point of a worldview, the entire worldview is under attack, because it's all interrelated. You tear up a chunk of it out, the entire thing is going to fall apart. Think about it in terms of a simple statement. We talked about a couple related to these, but how about this one? I see a ladybug on a rose. Okay. You tell your friend, hey, there's a ladybug on this rose over here. He didn't see it. What's wrong with you? Look again. So he doesn't see it. So what is required to make sense out of such a simple statement and situation? More than you might think. Let's start basic. The structure of a sentence is required. You have to understand nouns, verbs, articles, and prepositions. You have to understand the functions of these grammatical concepts. Also, you need to understand color. Ladybugs are a particular color, aren't they? Roses are a particular color, and there are different colors that are allowed for roses. You're not going to find one that's polka dot. But the general botanical classification of roses is also necessary. They don't look like other flowers. You need to know a little bit about the entomology of ladybugs, because they don't look like honeybees, or like cicadas, or like praying mantises. The biology of a class of insects. You also need to do take into account a few things we've already talked about this evening. The reliability of your senses, your eyes, your ears, your friends' eyes and ears, logical categories, maybe even spiritual categories. Maybe only the pure in heart can see ladybugs and your friend isn't pure in heart. That's silly, right? But it's a category you can consider. And we could go on. The point is, though, not a single one of those was an isolated belief, because you have to employ them all in order to, in some way, shape, or form, even if you don't realize it, to come to the conclusion that you saw a ladybug on the rose and figure out why your friend didn't. Nothing is isolated. There is no such thing as an isolated observation either. Everything is connected. Everything. Let's have some discussion questions. We have reached the halfway point for the evening. Linda needs more coffee. All right, questions. The issue is not whether you do philosophy, but how well you do it. Discuss. Why is that the case? People say they don't want to do philosophy. That's fine. You are doing it. Why? Because everyone has beliefs about what?
What is real?
What is real?
How you know?
Opinion.
What is good?
Yeah, what is good? What is ethical? How you know something? Those are true. All those things are the case. Everyone has a belief about it. Everyone has asked the question at some point, what am I here for? What's life about? Is it right or wrong to do this? Should we execute murderers? Should Putin be taken up by the SEALs? Is homosexuality acceptable? Does God exist or not? These kinds of questions. Everybody has them.
Well, everybody has a working answer to some of those questions as well. For example, you're going to live your life one way or the other, no matter how you answer the question whether God exists. And that is one of the first metaphysical questions. Does God exist? You're going to live one way or the other, regardless of whether you choose to answer that question or not. And if God does exist, what is God like? That's part of your worldview, and that's a question that you have to answer.
Absolutely. Very good. I can make it disappear.
Excuse me.
All right. What does it mean to reduce your experiences to law-like generalizations? I don't need more coffee.
I think that goes back, if I'm correct, that goes back to your truth kind of statement.
That's the other.
Casual.
What does it mean to reduce your experiences to law?
Example here on the board, the Kip wrote up here is one of them. We observe the world, we take in information, we see that certain things are repeatable, that they operate by
The lowest common denominator then.
of sorts. I suppose you could say it that way, sure.
So what you're talking about is that it's not a choose your own adventure, it's a pathological way of doing things.
Like, this will happen given these circumstances.
Yes.
So you can't, it doesn't matter of choice, so to speak, doesn't really even enter the equation in a situation like that. It's like, okay, this is how things work, this is how the world operates. We can use examples, we can mix hydrochloric acid and magnesium with the balloon in the test tube 12 times and we blow it up 12 times and we got the same result 12 times because the world operates by law-like parameters. We can make observations, we can take notes and that sort of thing. So we reduce the world to that and we do so with all sorts of different categories. You started to do philosophy when you begin to do what two things? You take your law-like generalizations, but also the second one that Tony started talking about.
So like, what is real? Or to get too far?
We'll get there in a moment.
But just
It's indiscernibility of identical facts.
That was just an example. But when we see that there are differences in this world, even among people, for example, people are all humans. We have different likes, we have different desires, we have different opinions about things. So there's relative nature of how things are existing in this world. People don't always agree. So there's relativism, but we do have law-like generalizations because we know this works every time. So you'd start doing philosophy when you try to hold these two things together. Anybody remember the big, vast philosophical problem that the name that I gave for that? The problem of the one and the many. Yes. Excellent. So then, what is the critical task of philosophy?
cross-examines people's opinions.
There you go. We're to cross-examine things and find out what people's presuppositions are in order to analyze them and see if they're consistent. There you go. The critical task, asking questions. They got Socrates killed, but that's all right. We're going to do it anyway.
It'll turn out better for you.
It will. We hope.
But there's a flaw there.
Why are metaphysics and epistemology important to doing philosophy?
Because metaphysics is what is real.
You got to know what's real, because if it's not real, why do we care about it? And how do we know what we know? Like, do I really know this or not? Those are good questions. The last question in this particular one, which is chapter 6. Worldviews are package deals. What do you mean by that? Can't go a la carte for a worldview. Sorry, that's not how it works.
You cannot weave together contrary ideas.
Can't weave together contrary ideas. Exactly that. Because all the presuppositions that you have end up forming your worldview, and they have to comport. They have to work together.
Yeah, a worldview has to be internally consistent.
Yes.
But no worldview except the Christian worldview is actually consistent with the world in which we live.
Yes. And that's going to become increasingly obvious as we continue going through these. I don't think we might start AICP today.
You know, when we talk about internal consistency, it means that the propositions within that worldview, they hang together. They show evidence of consistency. But when you start comparing those propositions to things in the real world around us, things fall apart pretty quickly. Because the world doesn't work that way, because the world was made by God, and God made it to work only consistently with the Christian worldview.
Trying to determine your own reality is a great way to get hit by a truck. And I mean that kind of literally.
No, that's true.
Because if you want to say, well, I don't believe that truck is out there, I don't actually think it exists, so I'm going to go stand in the middle of the road and just stand here. That'll work until your brains become part of the pavement.
Or I don't believe gravity is real.
Jump off a building and go squish as you hit the ground. You're going to become a smear. That's what will happen because you cannot make your own reality.
Or
You have to conform to it.
I believe that we can tax our way out of poverty.
That too.
I mean,
Economics are laws that operate in this world. They really are.
A philosophy. Economics runs by philosophy and logic,
And the Bible speaks to that just as much as it does everything else.
Absolutely.
First of all, by saying thou shalt not steal, that's an economic statement.
I can consume more than I produce. You know, I don't have to do anything. I can just sit around and eat all day.
Bad
So,
idea. All right. Now,
not in the world that God made.
no. So those are the discussion questions. Any other comments before I hit the click button again?
We're having our own philosophical discussion.
Oh, okay. Would you care to share with the class?
Oh, he was waiting for you to ask.
So, I'm taking to your chemical explosions thing theory there. Yeah. It didn't happen the same every time.
Sure did.
No, it didn't.
Well, I mean,
Hold on.
go ahead. Look,
Because if you're factoring time into your thought process, then you can only have one explosion at the same at that moment, that time.
sure.
Therefore, adding another dimension to the theory. What happens is that explosion could have only happened at that point in time with those two people, with that amount of gas, with that amount of chemicals.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And
So the process is the same, but the actual explosion itself is different. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, what I'm saying is that no two explosions are exactly alike. It's like snowflakes. Therefore, and plus, to humans, they occur in a linear period versus a.
There are going to be some differences, yes.
Yeah.
But you're getting at this when someone's talking. I forget who it was that used this as an illustration. You never
Heraclitus.
You never step into the same river twice.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that what I'm saying is
Because the
complementary
water
to that
moves in
is
different
the way it opens an infinite spectrum for choice. Therefore, it kind of grants the illusion of free will.
So there's what that's a perfect way to say that. It is an illusion of free will because we do not know all of the factors that
Exactly.
go to produce. But if we did know all the factors, then we could
Then we'd
for
be
example,
God.
if we knew well, sort of, if we knew the amount of magnesium atoms
That's
versus
actually
the
important,
hydrogen
by the
atoms, and if we had sufficient measurement equipment, then we would be able to predict it because the process works flawlessly the same.
But you still
But-
have to add the dimension of time.
And time is part of the created order.
And you'd add, what you're trying, what I'm saying is that period of time could only can only hold
Sure.
one event.
Right, right.
You could,
No,
because you
I
don't
understand
exist in outside of time to do something inside of time, that period event can only happen at that point
yeah.
along the linear
That
timeline.
particular, so
Yeah.
this is this is another philosophical principle, the principle of the non-identity of discernibles. And so that's what you're getting at right now. So these things are not the same event because they can be discerned by time, right? So they're not identical to one another.
Right.
In the ultimate sense, but they are not identical to one another in the ultimate sense, but really the illustration was simply to show that inevitably you're going to get the same kind of process happening in each situation,
Same kind of.
no matter how many times you do it.
And the reason for that is because of this super necessary important principle that is from the We're not going to talk much about it now, but we'll get into it because it is absolutely necessary. Because all scientific inference, such as the repetition of experiments, rests on the principle of induction. Induction is basically, what's a good way to describe it? Induction goes from specific incidences to
Sherlock
a general conclusion about it.
Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, no, Sherlock Holmes is deduction.
No, he gathers the information he gathers the data, and then he puts them together. Now, he talks about deduction, yes.
Okay, well, yeah.
But it's not actually
Brilliant deduction, yes. They're opposites of each other. But basically,
he's not a good
induction, you
philosopher.
take specific information and basically make a general conclusion. That's how you project into the future. Deduction is you take general principles and make a specific conclusion that is irrefutable based on the information that you have. But induction, neither of those work in an atheistic worldview, and we'll talk about that too. It's one of the great ways just to bulldoze the whole thing. But we use them all the time, so to justify it. Anyway, so we talked about worldviews, package deals. Let's talk about types of worldviews now. Types of worldviews. Now that we know what a worldview is, set of presuppositions, not just by natural science, through which we view all experience. We need to figure out how many different kinds of worldviews there are. This is not a comprehensive list of every single religion or moralistic position or whatever there happens to be in the world. Rather, we are going to see the primary options and then provide some questions you can ask to do what is called an internal critique of those positions. Questions that will very often show their errors right from the mouths of the adherents to them. So, internal critique. What is an internal critique? When you do an internal critique of a position, you ask questions of someone who has a particular worldview to see if it is internally consistent. Does your worldview comport? You hold this position, you hold another. Joe thinks that sodomites are fine, Putin should be shot. That's not consistent. You ask Joe questions about his worldview on that and say, okay, you realize those two things don't go together, right? You do an internal critique and to see if it can remain internally consistent. That is what is meant by an internal critique. So, a very important tool that we will do many times over, and that you'll be a pro at it with enough practice. So very important. All right. First big category of worldviews, something called spiritual monism. What word do you see in that word? Prefix. Spiritual monism.
A one.
One. Exactly. Mono meaning one, right? This position maintains that reality is made up of one kind of thing. So monism is. The prefix mono meaning one. Reality is made up of one kind of thing, and the nature of this kind of thing in this situation is spiritual rather than physical. Therefore, the physical world then comes to be thought of as something of an illusion, because there's only one kind of thing and it's all spiritual, they say. It looks like there are material things out there. It looks like there are distinctions between them, but in reality, all is one. It's all spiritual. So the nature of idea rather than hard reality. We used this as the example of the best and largest, I think, representation of spiritual monism today, particular belief, a particular religion called what? What did I say earlier? Hinduism. Hinduism is pantheistic. Now, they say that contrary to appearances, that everything is one. A Hindu would tell you there's no distinction between you and me. There's no distinction between the grass and the trees. There's no distinction between 9 and 12. All is one and all is God, so it's pantheistic, meaning that all is God. They also say that God is not material either. Now, it might seem, for example, that the table in front of you is real, that you're leaning on it, that you have your Buc-ee's cup on or whatever. So it's pantheism, but Maya. And God is everything, but it's illusion. So what do you think you're seeing and feeling It's not actually there. So as a result, there are no real distinctions in reality, just perceived distinctions. The cycle of life, as they believe and understand it, if you don't have good karma when you die, you are reincarnated back into this world as another life form. If you're bad enough, you come back as a lower life form. So live wrongly and you're going to go down the spiral, maybe as an ant or a roach, or worst of all, sludge. You don't want to be sludge. Sounds kind of gross. But in any case, if you live rightly and you ascend the spiral, maybe eventually you're going to be reincarnated as a Brahma bull. And then eventually you will stop coming back altogether. What happens then, according to the Bhagavad Gita, is that you, the single drop, will fall into the shoreless ocean of being, where you will stop being distinct, even in illusion. You belong to the oneness of reality. Okay, Hinduism is one example of monism, but it is the most common. So everything is one, and that one thing is spiritual. Monism, spiritual monism. Dualism. So we had monism, meaning one. What do you suppose dualism means? Two. There are two kinds of reality. Please note the spelling. That's dual A-ism, not D-E-L-ism. We're not shooting people or scoring off and dueling. No, that's not what that means. So as Diana rightly said, dualism is the belief in two kinds of reality. Dual means two. Either you have a mind-matter distinction or a spirit-body distinction of some sort. Now, some things are physical and material in nature, and other things are not. They're the nature of spirit or idea. They're immaterial in some way. One kind of dualism is called idealism. Idealists believe that the physical world is known by ideas or types that govern it, but they lie outside of the physical realm, the physical world. We talked about this already with the illustration of duckness. That's always Bonson's favorite example. Huey, Dewey, and Louie are individual ducks. But the concept of duckness would lie beyond reality, the idealist would say. The other reality, this world of ideas, is higher than this reality, this physical world in which we live, and it controls the reality in some way. There are billions of people in this world. All of us have imperfections of some sort, some of us more than others. But there is an idea of a man or a woman that conforms, or that informs, I should say, our idea of people. We have the concept of man, we have the concept of woman, and when we see someone, we put them into one of those two categories. Or consider the idea of a triangle. Is there such thing as a perfect triangle in this world?
No, but there's some that are all right.
Some that are all right. No. We'll go with this first thing that he said.
Depends on your philosophy.
Well, not really, because every triangle that's ever been drawn in the history of the world, even by a computer, is imperfect in some way. You draw a triangle with a computer, keep zooming in, eventually you're going to see pixelation, and it's not going to line up as a completely straight edge. But we all know what a triangle looks like. If I were to say draw a triangle, any of you on your piece of paper right now, each of you would be able to do it, because you have this idea of a triangle. The idea is perfect, but not the forms that they take, or the particulars, I should say. The idealist would say that these ideals, be they men, women, triangles, love, or whatever, they do exist, but they are in the world of ideas, and everything in this world, therefore, is just an approximation of these things. So, how do we know about these ideas or ideals? Well, we would intuit them, that the idealist would say. That is, they are in us prior to knowledge. They're a priori. They exist before we start thinking about them in us. So, in this world, when we encounter something like a chair, we attribute to that chair chairness. And we do the same with other chairs that have some resemblance to it. There are different kinds of chairs. The one you're sitting doesn't look like the one I was sitting on, but the stool would be in the category of chair to some degree. So with those, and these ones, and the fold-up ones back there, and the padded ones that are back there, and ones the backs aren't attached properly, but that's okay. But they all have some level of chairness to them, so we identify them as chairs, something that we can sit on that will hold up our weight, right? Ideally. Yes, that was a pun. Okay. So anyway, this is true to some extent. We know that it is. We just gave the example of chairs. So with regard to ducks, we've never seen duck nests. You can't kill duck nest hunting. You can't put it in the refrigerator. You can't cook it for dinner. But we can kill individual ducks. So maybe we'll talk about geese, because I like to kill geese because they're annoying. I can kill individual geese. I've done it a few times. It tastes like beef, actually. It's pretty good. But I can't kill goose nests as much as we might want to. So the idealist says that we have a spiritual reality of sorts. Look at that too fast. I don't want to do that. I'll make it all disappear. Anyway, lots of buttons to push. Buttons are fun. The idealist says that we have a spiritual reality of sorts. It's in our minds, and that we know the ideas, and there's a physical reality that we encounter, ducks or whatever else in this world shares. Stoicism, there's the next one. That's another form of dualism. Stoicism. Stoics believe in physical reality and a mental spiritual reality too, but they tend to be more moralistic than the idealists. The driving belief was since there are circumstances you cannot change that you will encounter, you ought to respond to it as a stalwart. You shouldn't let it bother you. More detailed than that, but that's the basic gist of it. So if you struggle against what comes at you in this world, all that's going to happen is that you're going to become angry and frustrated and unhappy with life in general. So let's just don't worry about it. So let's say you want to get to a concert on time. So on the other side of the city, it happens to be 5 o'clock, and they close some of the lanes on 465, and you're trying to get to this concert. It starts in half an hour, and your GPS tells you it's going to take 2 hours to get there based on current traffic conditions. No way you're going to make it. What do most people do in those kind of situations? Complain! In some way, shape, or form, lay on the horn, complain about it. Talk about how lousy NDOT is and trying to get it 465 repaired, any of those kinds of things, right? Frustration abounds. But that's not what the Stoic would do. Stoic would just say, chill out. Go with the flow. However slow the flow of traffic is right now. Life doesn't agree with your desires, change your desires. Give up your desire to get to the concert on time. No worries. Now, we learned in church history, for those who were in the class, about a particular Stoic named Marcus Aurelius. He loved it when his soldiers would embrace Stoicism, because then they would become very obedient soldiers. They wouldn't worry about their rights being violated or complain about how hard their service was. Like, this is just what life threw at you. Don't worry about it. Don't complain. Go with the flow. Now, Stoic mentality teaches that there is a wave of morality that courses through this world, that you need to get on board with it to go with the flow. But that's more deeper than we're going to be getting into. So the idealist says that ideas and reason are outside of this world. Outside of this world is an idealist. The Stoicist says that they flow through this world. But either way, you have a dualistic understanding of reality. Two kinds of reality, a spiritual idea or a physical body. Now, next, materialistic atomism. This one is the most common these days in the West, United States, Europe. Though Islam is creeping up on Europe faster than they ever want. But materialistic atomism, most of your atheists are going to fit this bill. This position says there's an infinite number of bits of reality. All of these bits, whatever they are, they're physical bits. There isn't anything spiritual or immaterial. Everything that exists is formed by smaller and smaller bits. Think about chemistry and physics. We talk about on the atomic level, protons and neutrons. That's part of the reason why people have come to this kind of conclusion these days, because they want to reduce everything to subatomic particles. It is the prevailing view this day for sure, in the physical sciences at the very least. It is a driving force behind the thoughts of the materialistic atheist. But a simple question that comes up almost immediately when you get presented with the worldview of materialistic atomism is, well, what's love got to do with it? Maybe not quite like that. What do you do with something like love? Is love material or immaterial? Is it a concept or some physical force? Now, what they're going to do is they're going to have to say, if they're going to try to be consistent with materialistic atomism, is that love is something that is produced by physical processes of some sort. Kip was talking about that earlier. They would appeal, say, to sexual desire in this way with regard to hormones and whatnot. But really, that's a terrible way to deal with it, because that does not even begin to account for, say, the love of a parent for a child or a soldier for a country. How do you account for those? Well, keep pushing. But there are those who do try to reduce love and other immaterial realities entirely to physical processes. Not many of them do, but when they do it, it's really pretty easy to show how absurd that it is. Just start asking a few questions like that. Because when you start pressing a materialist on something like love or anger or whatever, he or she will either deny that love and anger actually exist. That's, like I said, rescuing devices, they get absurd, increasingly so as you go through them. Or they're going to back off from being a materialist to some degree, slipping into kind of a dualistic way of thinking about things, at least a little bit, which is an inconsistency, which we'll talk more about later. So, Materialistic atomism also would deny the reality of the mind as opposed to the brain. They would call them the same thing. Because there are no ideals and no immaterial laws, your brain amounts to nothing. Your mind, rather, amounts to nothing more than your brain. So, materialistic atomism comes in two flavors, chocolate and strawberry. Maybe I just want ice cream. Maybe that's my problem. Anyway, nothing wrong with that, right? Stop looking at it. I'm just not having a good time with this. Maybe I should just go back to the other one. You were betrayed me. Oh, hold on, kid. Let's do this. Here, but this it's plugged into the top on top of the desk there.
Yeah.
This would be the older one. This one's bulkier, but it keeps working. I don't know why that keeps going. Well, we'll go back to this one. Diagnostics are in order.
You might have fallen down.
Maybe. Yeah, just disconnect that from it and pull the other one in. It's the second time it's messed up. I will keep moving as long as I don't move the mouse off that. There we go. This one works out. I don't know why it didn't. Two categories. The first is determinism. Determinists believe that there is no freedom of any kind. They believe that everything in life, literally everything, is predictable if you know all of the antecedent causes for it. For example, if you have a big enough computer that could collect all the thoughts of us in this room, as we were coming to class today, every conversation in the car on the way here, what we had for lunch, everything, and ran it all through some kind of an algorithm that could have told us where every one of us would have sat in here tonight. That's theoretically, at the very least, it would be possible to predict such a thing, because everything takes place because of antecedent causes, but not all of those causes are on our own heads, of course, so that's another issue. So there are a couple of subcategories of determinism. Determinism. Behaviorism is one of those. Behaviorism says that human beings act as they are conditioned to act, period. We do as we are conditioned to act. All behavior, they say, whatever it is the process of antecedent conditioning. We do what we were conditioned to do. Pavlov's dog kind of concept, right? We're glorified lab rats, more or less. Squeak, squeak, 2 or 3 times. So, we may think that we have freedom in this view, but that's just the outworking of all of our conditioning in life, and we really don't have a choice. That's one category of it. There's another subcategory called Marxism. The behaviorist is kind of on an individual level. The Marxist is on a corporate level. The Marxist doesn't focus on human psychology, but rather claims that there are historical and economic forces that determine the outcome of the society as a whole. Society is determined because of historical and economic corporate forces. So the Marxist is a determinist among other things, but on the aggregate level. He believes in societal or collective determinism rather than individual, because if he were just the individual, he'd be the behaviorist. Now, another form of the materialistic atomist is the hedonist. Now, this is not John Piper's version of hedonism. You might have read something that he wrote about Christian hedonism. He doesn't mean this. It's the same word as a different understanding. So hedonists live for one thing or another, and they argue about what it is that we should pursue in our lives. What is it we should live for? Well, which brings the most benefit is kind of the idea. There is the egoist, not the egotist, the self-absorbed person. The egoist is the person that says we need to live for whatever brings us individual benefit, and we use our quote-unquote free wills to get us ahead. This will be similar to pure libertarianism, doing what it is that you want so that you can get ahead in society without restrictions. This doesn't mean, by the way, that you are going to be outwardly selfish all the time as an egoist. You might help a short older lady reach something on the top shelf at Kroger. Kroger always comes up. Or you might help a distressed motorist change a flat tire. But you're doing this as an egoist not because it is morally upright or the right thing to do. It's not because of altruism, not because that you love your neighbor, but because of a calculated action that considers the future. You know, I might need help from someone else someday. So it's kind of like paying it forward is the concept. I need somebody to help me, and this is a good way to motivate people to do such things so that I can get the help I need someday. It's still purely selfish. The egoist or the utilitarian. The utilitarian believes that we should do what produces the greatest benefit for the most people. We use our free wills. Again, we're talking free will in this case because we're not under determinism or hedonism. Because our free will is to bring about the most good for the largest number of people. Okay? Socialism functions largely on this philosophy, a utilitarian concept. The idea is everyone should want to contribute to the welfare of others, and that understanding of welfare is a standard set up by the state. So everyone should freely pay taxes that are redistributed to others so that everyone can benefit. I say freely because under socialism, individuals and corporations still own the means of production. Once communism takes over, this ceases to be the case. Not all utilitarians are socialists, but it's pretty common. Then there are these guys, the existentialist. An existentialist stresses freedom of man so much that according to them, nothing governs what you will be. You come into this world as merely something that exists, and as you grow, you yourself determine what you will be. They would say that God doesn't determine it, the state doesn't determine it, your social conditioning doesn't determine it. Not even your biology determines what you can be. Sound familiar? All the transgenderism madness is an expression of existentialism. A very bad one. They say you don't do what you do because of anything. It's only because of your pure choice. You first exist, then you choose your essence. This is a radical doctrine of freedom, and it's really very insane. For the same reason that we talked about earlier with the truck example. I determine my own reality. And your brain is part of the payment. It doesn't work. But there you go. So to sum things up with these categories, there's one main thing that distinguishes these three views. One main thing that distinguishes these three views. That is monism, dualism, and materialistic atavism. The distinguishing factor is how they view reality. How they view reality. What is their metaphysic? How do they view reality? Is it one and spiritual? Is it two, mind and body, or spirit and physical? Or is it effectively one again, but just a bunch of little bits that make up a physical universe? Is reality matter or spirit? Is it one thing or two bits of the same thing, just a bunch of them? That's a lot to take in, I grant that. But if you get a passing familiarity about what we're talking about in class, that you've covered pretty much every category of worldview there is. All the big ones. Reality is one or many. It's mind or body. One more thing to put forward under this heading of types of worldviews, though. It's distinguished from them not so much on the basis of reality, but on the basis of whether or not you can know anything ultimately. So thus we have the pragmatist. Pragmatism. And its black-pilled cousin, skepticism. I will treat skepticism as a subset of pragmatism. Now, these are the guys who stand off to the side and listen to all these philosophers arguing and fighting with one another and all of this stuff, and they just say, who cares? And you all have thought that, haven't you? You're tempted to say that. I know that you are. I've been tempted to say the same thing. This is all crazy. Why do you care? But here's the thing. The pragmatist ends up not being a good guy. It does not work out. Guy by the name of John Dewey. You might have heard of the Dewey Decimal System. That's this guy, I believe. This is this guy, isn't it? I think so, yeah. Yeah. He was a pragmatist and sought to advance the idea of pragmatism. It didn't work out well. He turned out to be a very evil man. He was an influential American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer. His work emphasized the importance of experience in learning and the idea that education should be practical and geared towards social reform. The school of thought of pragmatism says all these old problems are worthless. The only thing that matters is whether or not you can solve your problems. Forget the theoretical issues. Get on to solving the problems already. Dewey said that it makes no difference if we know the nature of reality or not. If we're adjusting to our environment and advancing the species, if evolution is moving ahead by our efforts, you could say, then we're successful. And that, therefore, is the truth. Of course, that doesn't answer the question of why we consider something successful. Never mind about that, though. How do you know what's actually successful? What if you're not destroying everything? Pragmatism falls apart. But this is the whatever works mentality. There's kind of a humorous way to talk about these different views of philosophy and how they approach things. We can talk about the elephant on the shore. How do you get the elephant across the river? Well, if you bring the question to a British philosopher, he'd probably start out by saying, well, how much does it weigh? How much does it weigh? We need to figure out how much stuff is in it to see if it'll flow properly. A continental European philosopher would say, well, is the elephant real? How do we know it's actually there? The American philosopher would kick back and probably light up a pipe and say, well, how much would you pay me? Anyway, see, the American philosopher in this guy, he didn't care if it's real or not. You could tell, okay, you can call it whatever you want. You can say it's a feathered unicorn. I don't care. You want it across the river, fine, fine. How much are you going to pay me to do it? Will it work? Will I get paid for it? Does it benefit me? That's kind of the illustration between the difference between skepticism is pragmatism's black-pilled cousin. Skepticism. And pragmatism is bad enough. Skepticism is really goofy. But skepticism basically just says, no one knows for sure. You can't know. Pretty sure.
An absolute statement.
Exactly. It falls apart. How long did it take for that to fall apart? Seriously, a few seconds? But they just say no one can know for sure. Such a person tends to be very cynical about life. If you notice, you talk to people that hold this position, they're just really cynical. No one knows for sure about reality, knowledge, morality, value, anything. And what really matters is I'm just trying to get by. Why does that matter then? They're trying to get by not in the pragmatic sense, but in the self-serving sense. But again, how do you know you're getting by is the proper question for something like that. These people often became debate coaches in ancient Greece. They would be corrupt lawyers today who just take money to argue for a position without concern about whether or not that position is morally right or not. The guilt or innocence of the party. They don't care. How we get by, sophist is another word for it. But the skeptic will choose the position on what is the base of what's in it for him. Sophists, Skip used that term, that is definitely correct. They were a breed of skeptical philosophers who taught others to get their way in the assembly by learning how to debate well. Learn how to argue really well, say what you need in order to get your way. So this fourth broad category gives up the main categories of philosophy in favor of what works. Or, since they say some of them that no one can really know what's going on anyway, just do what you have to do to get your way. Okay, now, all of this is a simplification. But these are the broad categories, and it will get us by knowing the general categories of what people are in their worldviews. They will either be monists, and think everything is one in a spiritual sense. They will be dualists. They might think there are two kinds of reality, of idea spiritual and mind, or physical and body. Or they might be materialist atomists, thinking that maybe there is free will, maybe there isn't, but in all reality is a bunch of physical bits composed together. Things of atomic particles. Or they might just say, doesn't matter. Or no one can know. We just solve our problems, or I can just get by, we're doing okay because no one can really know for sure. Those are the categories. And everything fits into that. And when I say everything, I mean everything. When you're talking to someone of a different religion, this works this way too. This isn't just important for unbelieving atheistic style people of whatever stripe they may be. It works for any and all religious worldviews. We've already talked about Hinduism. Why does it work? Because other religions are necessarily false. Other religions are not true. They're not based on the revelation of the one true God. Therefore, they cannot be true. Because this is God's world. This is his reality. It is what he says it is, and therefore everything else necessarily will fall apart. It can't not fall apart. Make sense? All false religions, and this is important. You're going to like this. All false religions are simply other philosophies of men. At the end of the day. Maybe they're demonically influenced. Many of them, most of them probably are. But at the end of the day, any and all false religions are merely worthless philosophies of men. What else can they be? They're worthless. Because there's but one God. And he's given us his word. Revealed himself in Jesus Christ. Nothing else can stand. It's impossible. So, the method of refutation, we're going to look at for all of these things, will apply to religious worldviews just as much as to irreligious worldviews, because they are one and the same. They are merely the philosophies of men. Therefore, they die like men. And by the power of the Spirit of God, we're going to kill them.
The idea.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Not the minimum.
Not the people, the philosophies. I said philosophies of men.
No.
I use the prepositional phrase. You two, I'm not being violent.
was
Said
just
maybe
making
this
sure-
man right here.
I was just making sure that was on record.
That's fair.
That's
That's
all.
actually fair. That is very important. All right, now for the discussion questions based on this. Like I said, this tonight was the hardest stuff of all. If you're making it through this, your mind isn't completely cooked. It's not a couple of scrambled eggs right now. Then you're great. And man, the next lecture, fun times, good stuff. All right. Now that we have the categories in front of us, then we're going to start dismantling things. But questions first. Hinduism. How is it a good example of spiritual monism? What do Hindus believe? Everything is one, they say. You would know this probably better than a lot of us. Hinduism believes everything is one. It's all spiritual. Everything else, everything in the physical world is illusion. Maya, as they say. So they believe in spiritual monism. It's just one kind of thing, and it's all spiritual. You just think there are distinctions. There really aren't. That's fun to take apart. But
So is the illusion part of the one then?
there you go with your Western logic. There you go, making distinctions. But as a Hindu, we have been taught in the Bhagavad Gita, among other things. We know that all is one, and you are simply part of this world of illusion. You're not going to confuse me with your logic.
So when I come to thinking about the one, do I have to think about it the Hindu way and not the American way?
You see what you just did? How long did that take? Because that's a distinction. Regardless of how the Hindu answers that question, he's confirmed logical categories, and it's like, I'm just not going to reason with you then. Forget it. I'm not talking about it. Next one, please. Here's a microphone. Tell everybody.
Yeah.
That the reason that you're not willing to give up your Hinduism is because you are intentionally being irrational. Or another way to do it, and we'll talk about this again later on, the Hindu, Bansa did this in the airport a lot. It's like, I'm not going to accept your Western logic. Oh, you don't accept logic, huh? That's right. We've been taught, well, we are Eastern, you're Western, all is one. Oh, so if you don't accept logic, then you do. Because if you don't accept logic, then contradictions are okay, and I can say whatever I want. But I just told you that I don't accept logic. Are you making a distinction? Are you saying I can't do contradictions and that you affirm one?
You just did.
You just did. And he was creating a distinction there. So it's either, you're saying, so it's the Hinduism, the way of Hinduism, or no way at all. Boom. But that's easy. It was fun too. Dualism. Let's talk about dualism. Define dualism's two basic subdivisions. What are they? What are the two kinds of dualism? First of all, let me talk again. What is dualism? You see the word in there, dual, right? Not one, but two. Two basic subdivisions. Two subdivisions under dualism. 2 and 2. Not talking about 4. What are the two basic subdivisions under dualism? What were the two kinds of philosophy?
Spiritual or bodily.
Right.
Is that it? Idealism,
Yep.
stoicism.
There you go. We have the mind. We have the mind and the body, or the spirit and the physical, or the ideal and the particular, or the universal and particular, the ideal, particular, the spiritual and the physical. Even I'm starting to mess up now. And then you talked about idealists or stoics. Marcus Aurelius was a stoic. He liked it when his soldiers were stoics. Why?
Because they resign themselves to their fate.
Right.
They,
Don't
they
worry about it.
They practice imperturbability.
Imperturbability. Spell that. No, don't.
Moralistic.
In other words, nothing's going to bother them. Imperturbability means nothing is going to perturb you or bother you or irritate you. So if something comes up that you don't like the concert example I gave, right? It's two hours. No way I'm going to get there on time. The stoic is like, don't worry about it. Get rid of your desire to get there on time, and everything is at peace again. That's the stoic idea. So he liked his soldiers believing this, like things got difficult, they didn't have all the food they wanted, had to march for long distances or whatever. Don't worry about it. Give up your desire to eat right now, even though you think you're hungry. Then you don't have to worry about it. Right? You don't have to worry about things like rights if you're a stoic. Which is part of the problem with it, really. But let's see. Now, what of the worldviews that we discussed in our lecture this evening, what is the closest to our culture today?
The moralistic type.
Maybe the immoralistic type. Materialistic atomism is the one that I'm looking for. And they really like to latch onto that one because of what's what discovery we've made in the realm of science. It's in the word atom. We discovered atoms, which are all composed of subatomic particles, and there are 3 that we know of right now: protons, neutrons, and electrons. So it's all physical, but it's all composed of the same bits of stuff. Nothing exists outside of that, they would say. And that would be something they would appeal to justify that particular position. Now, John Dewey is a good example of a pragmatist. What do you believe about the nature of reality? First of all, 2 words. Who cares? Who cares? In other words, I'm going to do what I need to do in order to get by. Whatever is successful is the word that he used.
Whatever works.
But whatever works, which of course leads to the question, what therefore is successful? How do you measure success?
Give that a goal.
You got to have a goal. What if my goal is different from yours, etc.? Oh, interaction examples. I have this on here. I should do this. This is fun. Partly because of what you all said last week. I'm going to pull this out and look at a few things. I took a few screenshots of some of these goofy people that I've been interacting with over the course of the last week or so. They find me. They really do. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. Movie references. Never mind. I'm all the people that have gray hair and like, what is he talking about? All the rest of you are like, you watched that movie too many times, and you'd be right. This guy, I get on Governor Braun's page. I don't know what it is, but this one just seems to be hanging around when he talked about a little over a week ago, and he signed some executive orders instructing law enforcement to enforce Indiana's abortion laws, which of course is keeping the abortion laws closed. I commented on there at one point saying, okay, that's great and all, but support HB 1334. If you haven't contacted your legislatures about that, please do so. I'm going to do some of that myself with the QR codes are in the bulletin about supporting that so that all abortion is outlawed in the state of Indiana. Because there's still over 2,000 self-managed abortions that do take place. So I commented that. It's like, okay, support it. There's a Sweets on there. Patricia, I forget her last name, and now Zach Payne is signed on to it too, which is good. People went after me tooth and nail on some of this, and this guy, he got on there, and I responded to him moments after he said it. I don't think he was ready for it. That's fine, because he hasn't responded. But he says, and here I thought Hoosiers respected women and didn't think of them solely as breeding machines for men to satisfy themselves on. Way to prove me wrong. Way to oust yourself as someone who only views women only as either breeders or criminals. That's the response I get. Within seconds, I'm like, oh boy, you just walked into somebody. First of all, I'm not going to let him get away with making categories like that. I LOL, laugh out loud. Seriously now. My wife is the mother of all 5 of my children, and she would be the first to tell you that her children are a delight. Women being able to produce life is a wonderful, glorious thing, and you have the gall to come on here and denigrate the awesome wonder of motherhood by casting them as some sort of breeding machines. Flipped it right around on it. It's like you're calling it just breeding things? Motherhood is glorious. After all, God says that, you know. It's kind of important too. I continue. Your corrupt perspective is exactly why so many in our nation devalue life. Instead of thanking God for motherhood and for every life that is produced through it, you treat it like garbage. Something to be discarded if someone feels like it. And as far as men simply using and abusing women for their pleasure, God's word condemns such as much as it condemns the murder of unborn children. Specifically, rapists ought to be executed for their crime. And if a man wishes to have access to sex, then he needs to be married to that woman and love her, protect her, and provide for her for the rest of his life. He will cherish her as they build a home together. That's how it ought to be, and the reason it isn't that way is because of rebellion against God and his word, not because people are following it. You are badly mistaken, sir. He never responded. Just told him the truth. And notice, didn't move away for a second from God's standard. He denigrated motherhood. I affirmed it and supported it as glorious. Because it is. And every mother in the room says, amen.
Except maybe my mom.
Well, I mean, we did try to kill her earlier. So. To be fair, we did try to kill her. So. That's just a joke.
I know.
Anyway, this other guy, oh man. I posted something else on a Christian apologetics forum. It's a Christian group. This is a different situation. And this guy, someone posted a link to Answers in Genesis talking about proofs for Noah's Ark. There's an article they linked to. I was like, yeah, Answers to Genesis, they're great. They produce some wonderful stuff. And this one guy did a laugh react. Like, that's interesting. So I'm nosy, and I just get to stay away from these things. So I looked up who it was, and I tagged him in the comments. So not a fan of Answers in Genesis? He says, no, they're delusional. The Bible can't even keep two contradictory flood myths off the same pages. How many of each animal did Noah take on the impossible ark? Which answer is true and which one is utter nonsense? He didn't say nonsense, but this is,
Yeah.
you get the idea.
This is family oriented.
Mhm. And I said, contradictory? Why? Because it says 2 of every kind and yet 7 of the clean animals? You call that a contradiction? It's merely a further explanation. You're just biased against the Bible and are seeing contradictions because it's what you want to see. It's his worldview. He's coming from what? A faith perspective. Just like me. It's just the opposite one. And that is coloring how he's viewing the account of the ark. So he abandons that perspective and tries to come at me a different way. It's like facts don't lie. They don't, but do facts determine the story? People's view of the facts. Facts don't determine how people view things. We talked about that already, didn't we? He said, you've apparently never read the book of Luke. The Jesus from Luke is mind-numbingly different from the other 3 Gospels. Anyway, it's like, you didn't answer my question. How many animals? Was it based on cleanliness of the animals or not? The cleanliness answer just makes the size of the ark even more impossible. He says, I'm actually a fan of Answers in Genesis, and I'm reading this part because you'll get responses like this. I'm a fan of Answers in Genesis because they happily prove that there is no possibility under capital letters, any circumstances, that the ark was more than a parable. The fact that koalas are physically smooth-brained and incapable of recognizing anything other than eucalyptus as food, but could magically swim and migrate over several generations in the Middle East, is just another example of the numerous but qualifications required to believe it is a literal reality. I said, well, sir, you've already demonstrated that you aren't willing to give the Bible a fair read, which is entirely unsurprising. Instead of accepting my correction of your original statement about 2 different flood accounts, you move on to something else. The Bible doesn't talk about 2 different flood accounts, and it also doesn't talk about how the animals got there or how exactly they got back. You accuse the Bible of contradiction. I assume you consider yourself to be an atheist. Tell me, what's wrong with the contradiction? Why are they not permitted? Furthermore, why do you feel the need to lambaste someone for believing the Bible? Is there something wrong with believing the Bible? Inquiring minds want to know. And also, by the way, furthermore, the issue of the number of animals on Noah's Ark has been dealt with by Answers in Genesis ad nauseum, which you would know if you bothered to look up the research on the subject. Here's but one of the many articles they have, and I linked one. He didn't respond after that.
It's a very easy explanation.
It really is.
Well, here's my thing, is that he's an atheist, he's probably also an evolutionist.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he believe
Exactly.
that, they left a bunch of animals on Australia and they mated together?
That's another fair
Of
question.
their breed,
Sure.
and then they became like a dill looker, a duck, and a beaver, but they're married now. they're now platypi.
Perry.
I mean, that's inconsistent with his worldview.
Yeah.
Because he's
He should have no objection to that.
right.
Toads turn into princes all the time. Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Right.
Oh, y'all are great. But you start asking questions like that, and then he just fell apart and he stopped responding. He was angry in loud capital letters and everything, using profanities and whatnot. It's like, okay, so you're irritated. So what? I don't
That's the
care.
way I get when I can't defend my worldview.
Yeah. Do you have a logical reason for what you're saying? Did you read this article? By the way, you're getting after me, Mr. Atheist. If he's going to be a quote-unquote consistent atheist, there's nothing wrong, morally wrong with what I'm purporting anyway. Why do you feel the need to get on here and try to correct someone? Wait a minute, maybe you have this understanding of morality built into you that you can't account for. Maybe there's that. So those are just a few examples. These things find me. To be fair, I did tag him, but because I want to see this, I see it as an opportunity. It's like, okay, someone is saying this or reacting this sort of way. Where are they in how they've been exposed to the truth of God? Am I the first person to push back on something? Am I the 50th person to push back on something? Is my gospel presentation to or my challenging of his worldview going to be the thing that God uses to push him over the edge? and ask the question that we talked about several weeks ago. How do you account for this morality thing? Happy to tell you. We were both made in the image of God, and you can't escape it. The reason why we have these categories is because God has built it into us. We know that there's good and evil, right and wrong, logic, can't have contradictions, all those kinds of things. That we've all broken the law that this God has built into us, and we can talk about it in terms of Exodus 20, which we started to do in Sunday school this morning. And God is angry with the unbeliever. Very much so. He will judge us for our sin, except for the reality of the sin bearer. For all who believe, he has caused Jesus to become righteousness for them. So it'd be like as if they never sinned, as if they'd always believed that only comes and forgiveness through Jesus the Christ. He's the only way to account for any of this. He's the only one who can save you from your sin and to save your crazy reason right now, too, honestly. Those are the kind of questions that we're looking for. Those are the things that we want to get to. Now, this is the fun stuff here. And I 100% mean that. I'm dead serious. We have been laying a bunch of foundational framework stuff so far. But it's 6:55, so I don't think I'll start it early today. But I will say this. This is going to be, this section, it's going to be quite a bit. This is about halfway through my document so far. And I think this takes up the next third or so of it. The discussion of AICP. This is how to interact with and destroy unbelieving worldviews. This particular four-step pattern, this method that we're going to do. And it's just good stuff. It is the most important part of the class. I want to get hats or t-shirts or something with this acronym on it. So we should do that or something. But we're going to address specific worldviews and everything after this. We're going to talk about monistic views, dualistic views, idealists, and take down a few of those. But we'll do so after we've analyzed this. To learn this particular method. So, I'm halfway tempted to start some of it. We only have 4 minutes left, and y'all have been very patient with me already. Your brains are already baked enough, I think.
I don't do it yet.
Yeah. But atheistic materialism, by the way, the thing that we talked about, the whole materialistic atomism thing, after we learn this, that's going to be the first thing to fall, and it will be just utterly obliterated 3 times over. Questions, comments?
I think at one point you said something like the atheists and the Christians had access to the same information,
Yes. Same set of facts, if you will.
same set of facts.
This is a pulpit or lectern.
But
That
if
is a
they-
table.
But if they don't know.
This is my umbrella. I mean, no.
If they aren't fed the facts or know where to get them, they don't have the same information as Christians do.
True. I mean, you're talking about the difference in the level of knowledge of the facts,
Right.
not the facts themselves. But if we have the same fact like this particular laser pointer clicker thing, an atheist and a Christian at the end of the day isn't going to even look at this thing the same way. We can't.
Yeah, it's just saying not an individual atheist over here, an individual Christian have access to the same body of things. Just atheists and Christians in general. So you get a scientist who's an atheist and a scientist who's a Christian. They're studying geology. Well, they have the same rocks to look at, right? They have the same natural processes that they currently see, and they have the same strata in the ground, right? So, but they're going to both look at that and view it through a different lens and thereby interpret it differently. That's what he's getting at.
And a lot of the population does not follow that.
No, that's true, but that wasn't the point. Though the point was that the atheists over here and Christians over here have access to the same body of information. Now, if they know it, they may not know it individually, but they have access to it. The same stuff.
Anything else for the time being? No. That's fine. Start thinking about those 4 letters. Yes. Because you're not ever going to want to forget them. Hold them together. It's going to be that important. Just that so much fun. It's so enjoyable, but also will produce a lot of thanksgiving because of how the truth of God will really destroy all this stuff. Make it so that only what God has told us can account for even the fact that I'm holding this right here right now. Not about it. Well then, let's pray together, and then I will terminate the screen, and we'll go from there. Well, God, thank you for this wonderful day, this wonderful Lord's Day, the worship we've all been able to enjoy and experience as part of it. And for this class, as we continue to learn and grow, to become better equipped to defend the faith once delivered and make Christ known to anyone in any situation, I pray that we would have our minds filled with truth, and that we would rest firmly in what you've said, because you are God. You have made this world in such a way, and there's no way around it. I praise you in Jesus' name. All right. I'm trying to figure out why my clicker doesn't like me. My clicker likes me not. Oh. End screen.